Good evening and welcome everyone to this very special meeting tonight in which we are welcoming a lot of friends. Tonight we are going to talk about a book that everyone read, a book that everybody read in the 17th century, arguably in the 18th century, and probably ever since. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. Francis Bacon New Atlantis was not written as a book for philosophers. Bacon seemed to have a much larger audience in mind. Or in any case, he got a much larger audience because the book was read by scientists, by educated laymen with interest in science. It was read by politicians with an interest in reforming politics, by religious figures with an interest in reforming human beings. It was read by humanists or by people with an interest in utopias and in the humanist utopia. So it was read by people who have read Morus and Campanella before, and Plato. It was read by students, it was read by adepts of conspiracy theories. All these people read the New Atlantis. And of course, they read it quite differently. Hence the plethora of interpretations, some still surviving today. So our main question tonight is somehow along the lines of which of these readings is still interesting? How shall we read the New Atlantis today? And our guests are Daniel Garber and Doina Cristina Rusu. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us. And I will begin with a very, very general question. Who was Francis Bacon? Let's start with the beginning. Maybe Doina would like to start by answering this question. So Doina, who was Francis Bacon?
Okay, I will start trying to answer this question. Thank you, Dana. Thank you everyone for being with us this evening. I also just realized that my Romanian New Atlantis is gone, because I wanted to show you a picture with Bacon, and that was...
This is the mystery of New Atlantis. Here is the Romanian edition. Doina, I'm showing it.
It's somewhere around, because I did look at it again today. Who was Francis Bacon? Not the painter. We are talking about the philosopher Francis Bacon, Lord Chancellor of England. So just to say a few words about Bacon's life that might be useful to understand his writings. Bacon was born in the second half of the 16th century. He was son of Nicholas Bacon, who was Lord Keeper during the reign of Elizabeth. And that's very important because Elizabeth was very affectionate towards little Francis. He was calling him little Lord Keeper. And not only that, but it was Elizabeth who encouraged him to go to Cambridge when he was 12 years old, together with his older brother Anthony. After that, Bacon goes to France together with the British ambassador. However, his father dies and he has to return to England. He starts then his career as a lawyer, again with the help of Elizabeth. He gets place in parliament and becomes a lawyer before he should have actually, again, because she helps him. However, he will fall into disgrace, and that's something that might even be connected to what we are going to discuss later, because there's something that puzzles me in the New Atlantis and the entire Spanish affair. Bacon is pro a war with Spain, and he rejects the idea that the state would pay more subsidies to the Queen, and said that instead this should go to the war. And after that, Elizabeth doesn't like him very much. He manages to fall into grace again with the Essex affair. We are not going to get into these details. Another important thing, once James I becomes the king, Bacon starts also his writing career. He had published the essays before, but then during James I, he publishes The Advancement of Learning, and then later in 1620s, his Great Instauration. This project was really the project of how to recover human being and how to produce knowledge, that's the knowledge of nature, in a very Protestant way. The idea that we should try to be again as we were before the fall of man. So let's try to recover something of the knowledge lost by Adam.
So let me interrupt just a bit. So a politician, a philosopher, someone with high ambitions to rule England,
yes,
and someone with very interesting interests and diverse interests for all fields of knowledge. I would like to see what's Dan's opinion on who really Francis Bacon was and what did he want to do. Did he write Shakespeare's plays as well?
Who is Francis Bacon? Well, Francis Bacon was a whole lot of different people. He was a literary figure. He was a political figure. He was a lawyer. He was very interested in what we would now call science and in extending the control of human beings over nature and thereby improving society. That is probably this last bit for which he is still probably most famous, for the scientific works that he wrote, for the Novum Organum, for the natural histories that he published in the last few years of his life. And of course, for the Silva Servarum, of which the New Atlantis was published as a sort of appendix, although it isn't entirely clear whether that was Bacon's intention. But I think it's when we're talking about the New Atlantis, in a certain way, a lot of his different interests come together. It is a literary work. It's a story. It's in fact a kind of travel story. It's obviously also a political work because it has to do with the organization of society. And it's also a scientific work because it has to do with how it is that nature should be investigated and how it is that the proper investigation of nature is going to lead us to all sorts of wonderful technological miracles, which again are going to enrich society. So it goes back again to the political dimension. And in this way, one can see the New Atlantis perhaps as kind of culmination and summary of various themes in Bacon's life and interests.
If we are to talk about the New Atlantis, maybe one thing we can start with is to, well, explain its fantastic popularity. Why do you think it was so popular? Again, I started by saying that it was read for everyone and by everyone and with very different purposes. That it gained it gained a sort of extreme popularity in very different circles. And now you both have been saying that Bacon was a complex figure and that New Atlantis retains some of Bacon's complexity. Which of these aspects made this work so popular? That's a question for both of you.
All of them. The simple answer is all of them. I would say The more complex answer, well, I can only add to what Dan said. So it does reflect a lot of interest. So there is no surprise that someone like the Royal Society members saw that Solomon's house is their model for constructing a society of knowledge. At the same time, we can also see the very naturalized religion that we can find on the island of Ben Salem. We can see travel literature in the text. The political side might not be very prominent as such, but there are anyways hints at how the society looks like. Besides, it's full of, for example, mythical, alchemical, hermetic symbols all over. So no surprise that people said, well, this is connected to the Rosicrucians or to the Freemasons or whatever other hidden societies in the early modern period.
Right, so then what do you think? Is it just a nice story? Is it a piece of literature? Why do we bother with it if it is just a piece of literature?
Why do we buy? I think that there are two different questions. I mean, why is it that we are still interested in it? And I think in part because it is a marvelous piece of literature. But then there's also the question why Bacon's contemporaries and why the people later in the century were so interested in it. And there I think, well, there are a number of reasons, but one very striking reason is that it captures, I think, very much a spirit of novelty, of progress, of we're now doing something new, that I think was very captivating for people. Going back, much earlier, I think one of the works that I find really interesting is work by Polydor Virgil at the very beginning of the 16th century on sort of the history of inventions, the history of new things. And people were interested in that. And people were interested in the new things in particular that were being discovered in their age. This is the period of the Copernican controversies. This is the period in which people were looking at new advances in mechanics. This is the period in which all sorts of stuff is going on. Bacon is offering a model of what society is going to look like and how society is going to be transformed, or how society could be transformed by these new discoveries that people were making. And he's, in fact, more than that, offering a model of what kind of institutions are going to advance that. Doina talked about the Royal Society. Well, the Royal Society, or various members of the Royal Society, well, to go back for a moment to the introduction to the New Atlantis, William Raleigh, the editor of the Silva Savarum and the editor of the New Atlantis, says the main purpose of this was to advance the model of scientific investigation that one finds in the House of Solomon, which occupies a very significant portion of the New Atlantis. Later, in the 1650s and 1660s, various people actually use that as a model for what it is that they were doing in forming and founding the Royal Society of London as an institution for the advancement of learning. And this is, I think, and more than that, Bacon puts this, it isn't merely a constitution for a society for scientific investigation. In addition to that, it's putting it in the context of the society that is going to be sustaining this particular vision of progress, advancement, successive mastering of nature and mastering of technology. And that
let's perhaps just go a bit over the episodes of the book. I said everyone has read it, but just in case, to refresh our memories. You said, both of you, that this book is about science, politics, and religion. That we see an island governed by a body of, let's call them scientists, and I would very much like to see whether people agree with this name. Solomon's House, an institution made of 30-something persons. Maybe Donna would tell us more about the functioning of Solomon's House. And this institution is somehow at the head of a state, making some sort of arrangements, political arrangements, setting up some policies in ways that are not entirely clear. They are ruling the political world, or they are a political body ruling the island. And meanwhile, the same 30-something guys who are the depository of scientific knowledge and they are organizing a knowledge-based society are also the depository of religious truth. What is this Solomon's House then? How does it function? Just to kind of remind ourselves the structure and then see whether and how can this be a blueprint for any scientific society, even a 17th century one. Then would you like to go through the roles, or just to give us a very brief introduction into what is the Solomon's House? How does it function?
Of course. Well, we don't know that much actually, so Bacon doesn't give us all the details. We know there are 36 members of the Solomon's House, and that's a very clear hierarchy. So there are 12 who are just the merchants of light. So they go to other countries and they collect books and abstracts and patterns of experiment. So they just collect the things. Then they go back and there are 3 depredators who collect the experiments which are in all books. We have other 3 that collect the experiments from mechanical art, liberal sciences, and diverse kind of practices. These are the mystery men. Then we have 3 that try new experiments called pioneers or miners. Then we have those that draw the experiments of the former into titles and tables, and then they draw axioms out of them, the compilers. We have those that see what fruits can be produced out of all the former experiments done by their colleagues. These are the dowrymen or benefactors. 3 others try to direct new experiments of a higher light. These are the lamps. Then 3 execute the experiments. These are the inoculators. And finally, the most important are 3 that raise the former discoveries by experiments into greater observations, axioms, and aphorisms. And these are the interpreters of nature.
So first thing that struck me is that Bacon is very good with names. Lamps, merchants of light, pioneers, miners, mystery man. Oh my God, what is this about?
I think they really reflect. I think they really reflect what they are doing. then I think Dana
Can I
wanted.
make, no, I think that they are great names. Bacon really does have a knack for that sort of thing. But what's interesting here, when you look at the way in which he sort of divides up the tasks, first of all, it corresponds pretty well to the account of scientific method that Bacon gives in the Novum Organum. The Novum Organum is a treatise on, well, he actually doesn't use the word Methodus, on the way of constructing science. And part one is sort of general background, but in part two, he begins to actually outline the way in which one actually builds a natural philosophy based on a natural history. And the sequence of different groups within the House of Solomon that Bacon is outlining, that Dowena outlined, corresponds, I think, pretty well to the account of method that that Bacon gives in the Novum Organum. But what's also, I think, extremely interesting about the House of Solomon is, first of all, its history, and second of all, its place in society. It was founded by a King Salomona many years before, who was thought to have been inspired, of course, by King Solomon of the Hebrews. So it has this sort of, and it was called originally the House of the 6 Days, creation. So it has a biblical sort of resonance, both in its official name and in what it is that people call it. But what's extremely interesting is, and this is about the first thing that we learn about the House of Solomon in the New Atlantis, is connected with the coming of Christianity to Bensalem. According to the story that Bacon tells, the House of Solomon had already been created at that point. But according to the story that Bacon tells, there was, at some point off of the shore, a huge column of light with a cross at the top. And people got in their boats and went out to try to approach the column of light, but they were all stopped at a certain distance from it, except for a member of the House of Solomon, who came, who recognized this as a miracle, said a prayer, at which point he was allowed to go go beyond, and the column of light broke up into, it sounds like stars or something like that, and what was left was a chest in which they found the scriptures. So not only was it founded with a sort of biblical reference, but they were the ones who actually brought the Holy Scriptures back. Why was it the House of Solomon? Well, only somebody who understood nature could also understand what was supernatural, could also understand that they were actually in the presence of a genuine miracle. And I think that this is very, very significant. It is not only a scientific society, as Dowena had outlined, in which the you know, the parts of it show us how it is that we can construct a science. You first gather information about the world in various ways. You make certain first conclusions from it. You then go make more experiments. You make more conclusions until finally it gets to the stage where the interpreters of nature can actually produce a natural philosophy. But in addition to that, they are, in a certain sense, the keepers of the sacred book, the discoverers of the sacred book, and the keepers of the sacred book. And they are, in a certain way, this was actually written shortly after Galileo articulated his idea that, you know, nature has that there are two books of God, the scriptures and the book of nature. And Bacon's House of Solomon is, in a certain sense, the keeper of both.
Isn't it kind of dangerous in 1626 for someone to boldly affirm that the basis, the grounding for receiving the truth about God is first to build an institution that discovers the truths of nature?
It could be very dangerous, yes. It was, I think, very bold for Bacon to put it in that way. And certainly, you know, when you look at the a little bit, well, first of all, this happened after Bacon died. Well, there was a first condemnation of Galileo, sort of, in 1616. The main condemnation of Galileo was in 1632, 1633, after Bacon had already died. But yeah, that's what that was about, to a certain extent, is a conflict between natural philosophy and scripture. There were reactions against the Royal Society as well. Bacon was certainly very bold in making that connection, but he was also articulating, I think, something that was held by a number of people among his contemporaries.
We have here a question. Christopher Johnson has raised his hand.
Hi, he is bold, of course, Bacon, but he's also extremely circumspect. I'm just thinking about the way, in terms of the relationship between religion and science, I'm thinking about the way that the text is structured, in that the narrator visits, and these are the passages, or these are the pages that we often ignore in our haste, right? In our justified haste to get to his vision of what or his model of what a scientific research institute might be. But the narrator spends an inordinate amount of time attending the festival of the Son of the Vine, and then where what we would typically think of as religion is practiced. And it's only after those pages is the narrator introduced to the secrets or the description of what a scientific society might be. And I'm wondering if that doesn't mirror Bacon's gesture, say at the beginning of the advancement of learning, that I'm going to bracket certain questions of religion in order to proceed with the scientific endeavor, and that we don't see this imitated again here in this text. I mean, when we get to the House of Solomon or the College of the 6 Days, there's no mention of the book that is found on the ocean, floating in the ocean. That is, in a sense, already taken care of with the long narrative description of the festival of the Son of the Vine. I'm just wondering what people were thinking about the way that the text is structured in that regard.
Thank you, Christopher. Who wants to take this? I just want to remind everyone that this is a discussion, so jump in if you want. Send me questions, raise hands, draw some lines on the chat. Dan, you need to turn on your mic. Wait.
Thank you for raising that. These are some of my favorite issues. What's interesting is, as far as you're right, having introduced the discovery of scripture at the beginning, it doesn't come in again, but then it doesn't have to. The very first question is, how did you become Christian? And the answer is through the House of Solomon. And if you notice, there is hardly any other religious institution that is mentioned in the entire book. There is a priest who comes in the beginning, but in the end, after they give the description of the House of Solomon, Bacon talks about the ceremonies that they have, hymns and services to God. That is the only mention, I think, of religious practice. The feast of the I'll put aside for a moment, because I think that that's really central. But
you don't read the episode of the Son of the Vine as a religious festival? Or
yes and no. I think here is my reading of one of the really curious things is right at the middle. For those, just to remind you what it is that that's under discussion here. Right in the middle of the New Atlantis, there is this very curious passage about it's the Feast of the Family. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
And where somebody who has produced 30 offspring who are still alive is given this enormous, elaborate festival where he is honored and his children are honored. What's interesting here, by the way, is the mother is not honored. Mother doesn't play any role in it. The mother is in a box watching the whole thing, which is a very curious thing. But there is this, and that is followed by another extremely bizarre section on the Jew of Bensalem.
Yes.
And, in which Bacon is talking about Bensalem as the virgin of the world and chastity. So what is it that's going on there? Well, it is to a certain extent a religious ceremony in which, of course, a member of the House of Solomon does play a role, within the ceremony. But here is my reading of it, which is that this actually relates to scientific investigation. This is a metaphor or an allegorical kind of presentation of Bacon's method. If you notice between the Feast of the Family and the business about chastity and the Jew of Bensalem, the idea is that the person who restrains his lusts, marries, and does things in order and properly and within the confines of order and lawfulness produces fruit. The person who doesn't produces nothing. And this is, I think, exactly, this is an important theme in the Novum Organum, that in order to, well, he talks about experiments of fruit as ones that produce technological control over nature. And in order to have experiments of fruit, we have got to go slowly, we have got to go carefully, we have got to go in the proper order. or we're just going to get nothing. And that's, I think, what it is that the Feast of the Family and the Jew of Bensalem are about. They are, to a certain extent, religious ceremonies, but they're more, I think, civil ceremonies than they are religious ceremonies.
Then we have plenty of questions on the Feast of the Family, ceremonials, festivals in New Atlantis, and how to read the science versus religion connection. But before giving, and we have about 4 of them, but I would have liked, Doina wanted to say something, and she has a different interpretation on what's going on with the connection between science and religion, I think. Doina?
Yeah, it was not necessarily different, but maybe just to add something. So the advancement of learning talks a lot about why natural philosophy, so let's say science, is not a threat to religion in general. And why a natural philosopher, first of all, is actually appreciating God's work and become pious. And I think piety also comes back in the New Atlantis very much. So not only the members of the Solomon's house, but the citizens in general are very pious. And maybe that's why it was a member of the Solomon's house was allowed to approach the light and divination, because they are those who already knew in particular God's wisdom and goodness and God in general, even before having the revelation of the book, because they had learned already from nature. However, I'm not sure how much they already knew at that moment. So we knew that the house existed, but what they were doing before the revelation, I think it's unclear, but there is definitely the story of pious and chastity.
Maybe Dolores has something to say which relates to this point on the how to read the Feast of the Family. Dolores, please switch on the mic. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm going back to Christopher's point about not being too quick with the text. So we have to always take our time and notice that we're sailing from Peru, and of course this is a reference to Jose de Acosta's Natural and Moral History of the Indies. So right from the first sentence, we get an emphasis on distant places, which also reference China, Japan, and the South Sea. Winds and months at sea. So he's introducing right at the beginning this idea that that we're going to find new things in unexplored worlds, and which of course he uses in the IM, in the advancement of learning, and also in the New Atlantis and in the New Organon. But part of the new knowledge we find in these new worlds also are cultural practices, and so something like the festival is just an indication of the kind of thing that we could find in this new world. So what I wanted to say was, if we read Bacon in terms of the tradition of utopian literature, this is exactly the same sort of structure that you find in Plato's Republic. And so this idea of bringing in cultural practices in order to explore the new cultures of different worlds is just something that he emphasizes right from the beginning. And then he goes on to construct his utopia. So I don't know what people think about that, but I thought I'd just mention it.
Thank you, Dolores. That was kind of anticipating my question about the utopian connection, which dropped out so far from our discussion. Is this a utopia? Is it exploiting the utopian conventions?
What is a utopia?
Sorry, Doina.
Before we can answer this question, we have to ask you, what is a utopia?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go on in the direction that Dolores was suggesting, namely readings of Plato's Republic, attempts to clarify problems that stand out from Plato's Republic, namely, for example, how should justice be distributed in society? What is the relation between truth and justice? In what way you can ensure that a society is ruled by the philosophers, and how do you select those philosophers? What qualities they have to have? There are all sorts of problems that utopias before Bacon have picked from Plato, such as common property. Can we argue for common property in a perfect society? Or how about marital practices and producing offsprings? Morus, for example, and Campanella are making a lot out of this. What kind of education do citizens of the perfect society need to have, and so on. So in this sense, the utopia like more utopia like Campanella's Utopia, a text that responds to some of the problem posed by Plato's Republic in this sense.
Can I
Yes?
address that a little bit? I also don't want to, if other people would like to get in on that, just to say a brief word. It seems to me quite remarkable how little Bacon talks about all of the things that are so prominent in Plato, in More, in Campanella. This is very selective. You don't really find out very much about the system of government. You don't really find out very much about how people live. What you find out about is, and what Dolores suggested is absolutely right. The Feast of the Family is an instance of sort of an exotic custom that one can expect to find in exotic places, and which a reader of something like the New Atlantis would expect and would be looking for. But on the other hand, but that's not inconsistent with reading it in the context of Bacon's larger program as well. Why this particular custom? What significance does that have for Bacon? It's not arbitrary, I think. But what's interesting is what Bacon does focus on and what Bacon completely leaves aside. In Raleigh's preface, he says, well, this is an unfinished work. Bacon was just, what he didn't get to all of the stuff about sort of the organization, the political organization, the organization of life and so on, that he was intending to get to. But I'm not really sure. I think it was intended. I think where it ended was exactly where Bacon wanted it to end. And I think also that it was not intended, and the question is it a utopia? Not in the sense of Thomas More, not in the sense of the City of the Sun of Campanella. It is a much more focused, it's a scientific utopia, perhaps. He's interested in a particular aspect of society. And it is, I think, utopian in the sort of colloquial sense of it's presenting a view of life that's intended to be attractive and worthy of imitation. But it's not intended to sort of fill in all of the details the way in which, say, More and Campanella, not to mention Plato, were.
If you remain here just a moment, we have two questions. Hanok Benyami has a question, and then Wana Matei. Let me try to find you. Hanok, can you turn on your mic?
Sure, of course. Thanks very much, and hello, everybody. It's a small question. You were mentioning Plato's Republic, but it's the New Atlantis. It's more like a reference to Plato's old Atlantis, which is in the Critias. So it's a dialogue with Plato, but more with the Critias and a little bit in the Timaeus. But that's it. Thanks.
It's true.
That's actually a very, very important suggestion, I think, and of course it connects with the Timean tradition and with the story of the Atlantis. Dan, Doina, do you want to respond to this, or shall we take 2 more questions on the utopian aspect, and then maybe?
Well, I think what Hannah says is absolutely right. The relationship to Plato is more complicated. There isn't, so far as I can see, a direct reference to Plato. There is a direct reference to More's Utopia in the Jew of Bensalem section.
Well, there are 2 references, I think, to Plato when he talks about the Great Atlantis that was mentioned by your philosopher.
Right,
So,
that's true.
Yeah, it's a clear reference to Plato talking about.
But not the Republic.
No. And
Right.
if I can add something that I found interesting here, except for Plato and the Great Atlantis, which according to I think it's the governor of the House of Strangers, there is no Atlantis that mentions the island. So in the text, we don't find anywhere that this would be the new Atlantis.
Yeah.
Except for the title, we don't know anything except that there was a Great Atlantis, which was the Americas.
Right, Juana had something to add. Juana, I have to turn on the mic.
It's not a question, actually, it's rather a point on the pedagogical aspect of the New Atlantis, which I think
Can you speak up a little bit, Juana?
a little bit. Okay.
The pedagogical aspects, one, are actually very important because they are part of the utopian tradition. So yes, I was waiting for
exactly. That's why, and I think that the New Atlantis actually addresses a very important question of the Plato's Republic, namely how do we educate philosophers, and how do we educate not just philosopher leaders, but also how do we educate citizens? What kind of attitude do we want to inspire? Because, for instance, apart from the institutional readings of the New Atlantis, there was also, the New Atlantis was also very popular in the mid-17th century among a number of people that were not connected to institutions in mid-17th century England, for instance. And I'm talking about people in the Hartley Circle. You know, actually it was this kind of attitude of getting involved in this new model of society, that everybody has to contribute to this model of society. And I think this kind of attitude, again, was very, very popular. And this attitude is connected to the pedagogical aims of the New Atlantis. And I think Bacon was, he aimed it, actually.
Well, one actually here, I have a kind of ongoing question for a while, that after rereading and discussing together in the previous weeks here, Morus and Campanella, which are so much insisting on pedagogical programs and education. Rereading Bacon now, you are struck by the huge missing part, which is how are citizens educated? We know how they are born. We know that, you know, the feast of the family is celebrating birth. And then we know how they marry, but you don't know anything in between. There's nothing about schools. There is nothing about learning to read and write. There is nothing about art of memory. There is nothing about how Solomon's house is selecting its members. So it's really striking in a way that, yes, education should be extremely important if the society is supposed to acquire knowledge and mastery over nature. But meanwhile, Bacon is very mysteriously silent about how this particular, how is education performed? How are citizens supposed to learn, first to read and write, then to learn about nature, then to learn about whatever, and then to become eventually members of Solomon's house, or helpers of Solomon's house, or something connected with Solomon's house. What do you think, Juana?
I think Bacon was not that cryptic, actually. Perhaps he does not describe, systematically a way of education. I mean, as Campanella did, you take children from a very early age and you educate them this way in common groups, as far as I remember. I don't want to say something stupid here. But I think Bacon was, again, how do you educate people? By practicing natural philosophy. I think that's the model. By doing experiments, by enlarging your knowledge, adopting everything that is important and true in, new systems of knowledge that you are not accustomed with. So I think that's the way you educate people.
But Bacon doesn't say anywhere that the rest of the inhabitants are practicing any kind of natural history or natural philosophy.
That's true. Again, he does not instruct precisely that people should do that, or people, this group of people should do that, and this category of people should do that. But I think that's the, let's say, general model. And also, I think this also connects him to Plato's Republic, because as far as I remember, in Plato's Republic, the principle was oikopragia, right? Am I pronouncing correctly? And according to that principle, each category of citizen was supposed to do exactly what they were designed for, naturally designed for. And I think you don't have a very precise description of how you educate, how would we call it? Artisans, right? The category of artisans. Actually, what Plato's Republic was describing was the kind of model of education for the philosophers' kings. So if you want, in this respect, the New Atlantis also resembles Plato's Republic. So.
Right. We have a long list of sideline questions here, and I want to put them in the main discussion. So Audrey, please turn on your mic. Audrey Borowski.
Thank you very much. Actually, I find this this point very interesting, and actually jumping on that, the broader question of the credibility. How credible does Bacon think his work is? Because, for example, I mean, he leaves a lot of gaps. We have this beautifully created society, but no details. Similarly, we have mention of a Jew in an extremely crushingly, if I may say so, Christian society. And related to that too, and something which is a bit striking, is that the island specifically and explicitly prohibits polygamy, and yet it is possible for a man technically to have 30 children. So I find these elements slightly puzzling and slightly, I don't know, a bit strange in this account. And I was wondering to what extent how Bacon viewed his account himself, and how credible he thought it was.
Dan?
Just briefly, the Jew that he's talking about, Bacon explicitly says, unlike the other Jews, he doesn't deny Christ altogether.
Yeah.
Is sort of a Christian. And as far as the 30 children, it's not 30 children, it's 30 descendants.
Okay.
Grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well. But you're right, that is a little, and it's still possible to have more than one wife, just not at the same time.
Yeah.
Just to let you know that on the chat, we have an answer from Hannah on how is it possible to have 30 children. but Rudy wants to follow up on this. Perhaps not on the 30
well, on the children. Well, on the children, of course, we have to remember that there are very big demographic problems all around Europe in this point of time, and especially in England, and therefore it could be seen in that way. But the kind of observation I had was more general, and it's more a question than an observation. It's like I always tended to see a scientific utopia, but I also tended to see the New Atlantis also as a model of interaction between political power and scientific institutions, which is something that I think is sometimes overlooked. We are at a point of time where, of course, the new science is not something neutral for the political power, for the religious power. And basically, Bacon is proposing to replace institutions that, to a certain extent, had molded on the form of that the political power had taken in the centuries, that is the universities. And here we have a proposition of the way a scientific society can cooperate with a political power in a certain way by exchanging, for instance, providing technological discovery to improving society, and et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think about that?
Can I say something here?
Yes, please, Dan.
I think that this is a way in which Bacon's picture is perhaps even more radical than he may have realized. Well, first of all, I do think that the House of Solomon winds up replacing religion. That there is no, well, the way in which it's pictured in the New Atlantis, it is taking the place of religion. Science is taking the place of religion in a way in which I think one might say anticipates what it is that's happened in Western societies, in the 20th century, in the 19th and 20th century. But it also seems to be replacing political structures. At the very end, after at the very end of the New Atlantis, Bacon says, we have consultations, which of the inventions and experiences we have discovered shall be published and which not, and take all an oath of secrecy for concealing of those which we think fit to keep secret. Though some of those we do reveal sometimes to the state and sometimes not. For somebody who believes that knowledge is power, as Bacon does in some sense or another, this suggests, who is the real power. And Bensalem, it looks like it's the House of Solomon because they are the source of knowledge. They are the ones who decide how it is that knowledge is going to be diffused. And more importantly, what knowledge is not going to be diffused.
Here we have had a questions from Gideon, who unfortunately had to leave, but let me just read it because it's relevant and to the point. Gideon was saying, I wonder if we should think of education against the background of secrecy that seems to be more prominent in Bacon's New Atlantis than in other Bacon's works. Dan, this was going along with what you were saying.
I didn't realize you were addressing that to me. That's a very interesting suggestion. I actually think that that the question of education, like the question of the structure, the political structure of the society, was simply not of interest to Bacon in this work. That Bacon in this work was more interested in natural philosophy, natural history, technology, and the connection between that and religion. And I don't know, I don't think that the lack of discussion about education can be read as saying anything about what it is that he thought on the subject, except perhaps that he didn't think it was as important as various other people like More or Plato did.
Can I just jump in here for a second? Because I think the secrecy, I'm not sure the secrecy angle, as it were, holds up, as you say, because at the end, he's got a whole list of very practical magna naturalia, many of which are medical, and you know, like the prolongation of life and the restitution of youth. And these desiderata are repeated almost verbatim in many of the desiderata lists of the members of the Royal Society. So Dan, could you speak to why it is that he produces this magna naturalia at the end of the New Atlantis?
May I just jump in and say that this relates to Sorana's earlier comment on how actually the house of how the Ben-Salamians are not doing natural philosophy. Sorana, do you want to enter here and comment a bit and unmute your microphone?
Hi. I'm not sure that this will be in sync with what Dolores was asking. But anyway, yes, but Doina said this already, that in response to, I forget whom, I'm sorry, that it isn't the case that we are told that the Ben-Salamites are practicing natural philosophy. It isn't clear at all what is the source of their morality. We're only given a description of their piety and humanity and chastity and whatnot. But indeed, any kind of account of how they get there, education, pedagogy, any kind of relationship between the science of Solomon's house and the morality of the Ben-Salamites is missing. There's nothing there. We're just given this juxtaposition of an image of virtuosity on the one hand, virtuousness on the one hand, and technological and scientific prowess on the other. Likewise, that the relationship between science and religion is completely unclear. Yes, we do have that episode of the Pillar of Light, but in the economy of the island, what is the relationship between the powers, the institution, the scientific institution, and the any kind of religious body is equally unclear. As Dan said, there is a priest there. The governor of the House of Strangers is a priest. What is his relationship with the House of Solomon is again unclear. The relationship between science and politics is unclear. Yes, there is a state, and as again Dan said, the institution of Solomon's house has this prerogative of imparting whatever secrets they want to the state. At the same time, however, I was thinking about these days, since you proposed the theme, they seem to have taken over the one prerogative of the traditional lawmaker. The Salomona lawmaker, the King Salomona, who is presented in the text as a lawmaker as well. And one of the things he instituted as a lawmaker was the rules of secrecy, the rules of isolation and rules of secrecy. That's how the whole idea about Ben-Salim remaining cut off from the world started. And what we learn at the end of the New Atlantis is that the father of Solomon's house, who entertains the narrator sailor, decides that the story can now be published, as he says. So that seems to be a change in the laws of isolation that had held until this moment in the island. So that means that that Solomon's house has a part, at least, of the law-making attributes of the island. But that's also one of the reasons, I think, that the opening up of the island at the end, one of the reasons why this cannot be read as a utopia. The end of the New Atlantis introduces the possibility of change. Time has come for some reason for the arrangement of the island to change.
Is that really
so?
So I do agree with almost everything Sorana said, except for the change. Because we know there were 13 people, strangers, who went on the island and then went back to their countries. And the text says, we don't know what they told about Ben Salem, but in any case, probably no one believed them.
Right, yeah.
So it can be the same, you know, you can publish, you can tell everyone, but you won't be believed anyways. So I'm not sure if that's a change or is just the same.
Right. Well, I suppose both possibilities are open. But I would say that from the economy of the text, when which has that what you mentioned as part of the story that culminates with this other episode of the narrator being told the secrets of the house. It seems to me that from the building up of the narrative, that the final moment has a bit more weight than the initial detail. And also, obviously, this is a text that Francis Bacon throws out into the world, wants his new program to become popular. It would seem like he's interested in the communication of the secrets, maybe.
So is Bacon the sailor, the main character of the New Atlantis, who's been told the secret?
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Well,
that's a lovely speculation.
It's you know, this is also part of the Morus Utopia. The story of Morus Utopia is said by someone who is identified like a humbug. Raphael the humbug, he's talking nonsense. So there is a sort of, this is just a fantasy, or even worse, this is just a dream, or even worse, maybe we should believe the very opposite of what we are told in Morus. Now, some people have said that this is in Bacon as well, that there is a dark side of the New Atlantis, that we are told very nice things about science and the marriage between science and religion and morality and so on, but there is always a dark side. And Soran, I wanted to go back to your previous remark on the side. There are all sorts of things going on the chat, very interesting. I'm trying to bring them back to light. So how is it with the pillar of light being a trick?
That's part of the sinister reading of the New Atlantis. But if I may, I guess the allegorical reading of the fable that Dan proposes and others have, it can solve a lot of these puzzles. You don't need an exact account, a natural historic, an ethnographic account of what is going on in the island, if what your purpose is to propose an allegory of aspects of your program. And if you take this route, everything ties in very nicely. The methods, the virtues of the experimentalists, I don't know. But yes, there is the other side of the coin, where the scientists may just be gruesome manipulators of the whole situation. We do learn within the description of what they can do at the end of the story, that they can create all sorts of tricks. And illusions. And they, among the magnalia naturae, the things that are promised as part of the fruit of this program, a control of the imagination. And there are readings, articles on this possibility that the story is about how the scientists, exactly because they know the secrets of nature, can control nature in a less than virtuous way. The pillar of light may have been just created by the fathers of Solomon's house to, well, either, and here is where there are two possibilities, either simply subdue and dominate a population that is turned into credulous sheep. That's one possibility. The other is they want to manipulate the others in a charitable way. They need to, guide their sheep towards a better future. But in either case, they would be, choreographers of the whole spectacle, and they do have quite artistic powers. They put up all sorts of shows.
We have a number of interventions on this point. So Christopher and then Denise.
I wanted to speak to Sorana's skeptical or even maybe dystopian view of reading, which I share on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, perhaps. But,
that's not my official view, Christopher.
Okay. Perhaps the utopian aspects of the text and the omissions of institutional considerations, of even political arrangements, might be solved if we attend to the rhetoric of civility that informs the text from the very beginning to the very end. In other words, I'm thinking of Claire Preston's reading of Thomas Browne as also a science of civility. And what does it mean to be civil? Well, everyone treats each other with a kind of tact, understanding, cultural, a lack of, on the face of it, a lack of violence, a lack of dissent, on the face of it. And it seems that implicitly that's what Bacon is suggesting is the grease that makes this whole utopia work. That there's an ethos at the very heart of this text that informs all cultural and scientific endeavors. That's anyway how I'm reading it right now.
There is another question at this point, Denise.
Hi. One consideration that could run against the House of Solomon being manipulators is that if they are manipulators and that this pillar of light is their invention to astound the society into giving them more power by taking this group as the interpreters of the spiritual, then it's not just some religion on this island that is being implicated as being through false foundations, but it is Christianity, or at least a version of Christianity that is on this island that is a subject of this manipulation, that the society, the parts of society that are not in the House of Solomon are virtuous and they are chaste, they are good in many ways, but they are being fooled in some way by the House of Solomon. And that seems to attribute to Bacon the possibility that there can be such manipulation of not just some religion but Christianity, which is of course much more problematic for someone in his position to say. But I mean, of course, the House of Solomon is not ordinary governing body or relation of a governing body. It seems that they are the society does tolerate other religions, but perhaps because it has among its leaders the House of Solomon, which bases its governance on scientific terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, this is a very interesting point here. Is it science empowering religion, or is religion empowering science? A long time ago, Emanuele Costa wanted to ask and intervene and ask a question about who is allowed to interpret scriptures.
So it was a question, it was a puzzle that I had on the connection between the North Martyrdom and the New Atlantis. And I was wondering if it is indeed that religion is established through the House of Solomon. So it is established by someone recognizing something as a miracle, as Dan said. Is it the implication then, is it that they're the custodians of religion, so it's up to them to interpret scripture? Because the interpretation of scripture in the 17th century is a huge debate. So I was wondering, at that point, is it subject to the same constriction that science has? So for example, all the idols that are mentioned in the New Organon. So should the House of Solomon interpret scripture according to a scientific method, as other authors could suggest? I'm just puzzled by this connection. Thank you.
Dan?
Can I say something about that?
Please.
I actually don't know what that. I don't know of any place in Bacon where he actually addresses that. Certainly, it was a big issue. And the official after the Council of Trent in Roman Catholicism, it was only the appropriate authorities had the right to interpret scripture. Sort of a standard Protestant view would be everybody has the right for themselves to interpret scripture. But of course, Hobbes, who was Bacon's secretary briefly at least, famously in his political writings, says it can only be the sovereign who can do that. It's interesting though, when Spinoza actually in 1670, and of course this is many years later, raises the question of proper interpretation of scripture, what he actually does is goes back to Bacon and uses very much the language of the Novum Organum.
Right, that's kind of what I had in mind. That's where I wanted to go. But do you think it's already clear in Bacon, or?
No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. Sorana, you had a point. You have to turn on the mic.
Excuse me. Okay.
Yeah.
On the question of manipulation, manipulation is perhaps not such a bad word in from a Baconian point of view. Manipulation is what the scientist does. Manipulates nature, and that's part of the Baconian program. Manipulate, the Baconian word for that is operation. As you know, that's part of the science. It's part of the way to knowledge of nature for Bacon. It's knowledge and operation are not speculation, as it says, and operation are not distinct. operation is how knowledge is produced, that is through experiments. I'm wondering whether there can be an experimentalist reading of what is going on in the New Atlantis, in a true Baconian spirit, so to speak, and also, as you know, Bacon does speak about not only operation on nature, but operation on human minds as well, which should not be understood as a sinister project in perhaps in terms of later, even 20th century notions of manipulation, but rather in the sense of the specific Baconian sense of intervention into nature, whether of material bodies or of humans. So from that point of view, you might well think of what is going on that island in terms of experimentation. Both in terms of natural experimentation on nature, the business of Solomon's House, but also in terms of experimentation with all the good connotations of the word on humans and on societies.
I think we have a question at this point from Andrei Marashoiu. Andrei, you have to turn on the mic.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Is everything fine?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
We do.
So just piggybacking on what Silvana was saying, and the whole discussion earlier about how religion and science are supposed to relate to each other, I was just wondering, why Bartholomew, right? Why start from the Gospel of Bartholomew and say that, well, if these people receive Christ, it must be by some sort of, lost gospel or Gnostic gospel, what's going on there? And I took a quick read of some of these verses, and it appears that Bartholomew is asking, well, how could you know, could you tell us a bit more about what the heavens are like? And then once you die, Jesus, could you tell us a bit more about what hell is like? And so Bartholomew asks some very pointed questions about the nature of heaven and hell and things like that, and how bodies could be transfigured and things of that sort. And so when we think about the relationship between religion and science, it might be that
There's a very moment of answer.
The apostle matters here. Sorry, sure, go ahead.
I think that the connection was so bad that we have lost the most interesting part. Roughly speaking, the last two propositions of your intervention. Can you say it again?
Oh, I see. I was just wondering about the Bartholomew connection.
Right. Is there a manipulative religion as well?
I mean, I was just wondering whether right.
Let's try the. I mean,
I can go on in the chat, so maybe you can address.
Try to put it in the chat. Try to put it in the chat. I think that but we do have a very interesting point here. That do we have a sort of manipulative religion as well as a manipulative science and a manipulative politics? Doina, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there is even something more about Revelation. Some texts that were not written yet were mentioned. They were in that box. So how can that be? So okay, miracles, but it's something that didn't even happen in time. Those texts were not written yet.
You are making Bacon, all of you are making Bacon a very sinister figure tonight. He's kind of inventing a new religion. He's heretical. Dan.
Can I just, ask, I mean, Sarana, that's a very interesting reading, but on what, is there something in the text that suggests that that this is indeed what it is that Bacon has in mind? I know a few years ago there was a book by Jerry Weinberger, which argued for a Straussian reading of Bacon based on supposed contradictions in the surface that led us to an esoteric reading for, the truly wise. And I must admit that Bacon is complicated, Bacon is subtle, but I find it difficult to believe that he's really duplicitous. And I find it difficult to, particularly reading the Pillar of Light as anything other than what it is that he says, that the member of the House of Solomon says, we know what nature is like. So because of that, we can recognize a miracle, and this is a miracle. I suppose you could read that into it, but I'm wondering why it is that one should, or why it is that you think that it's a plausible thing to suppose that that's what Bacon had in mind.
Dan, I don't.
Good.
No.
I know there are people who do, but
I know that too. That's why I brought up this this possible reading. But I think what I was suggesting was a reading of an understanding of the notion of manipulation that does not need to suppose that all is a trick.
Yeah.
That is, we need not suppose that Bacon is duplicitous, that he's having fun and making a joke out of all of this. None of his other writings suggest that he could do this. So let's give the Pillar of Light its due. It is what it is. He's making an important point. I think the most important point in that story is that the fathers of Solomon's house just know the secrets of nature, and that's why they can tell the difference. But at the same time, you can accommodate this with an understanding of the experimental nature of the whole island. Why did Solomona isolate it from the world? Wasn't it a kind of experiment? He's a wise lawgiver. Remember that experiment for Bacon means to be able to extract laws from within the particulars, so to speak. So that they may have been an experiment, and perhaps the fathers of Solomon's house continue the experiment in the Baconian sense. They are observing what is going on with the people, they're observing what is going on with nature and with the society, and they're manipulating in the sense of rearranging particulars in such a way that they understand better what the laws of nature are. That's what I meant.
I think that Dolores has a point along the same lines here, connecting the New Atlantis with the Silva Silvarum and the experiments in the Silva Silvarum. Dolores. You have to turn on the mic.
Yeah. So I think the New Atlantis is extraordinary because it's a Bacon synthesizes a lot of what's going on in the New Organon and in the Silva Silvarum, a very organized text with a very unorganized text. And if you collate the intertextualities between the Silva Silvarum and the New Atlantis, there's an extraordinary number of correlations with the kinds of experiments that are encouraged in Bensalem. I'd like Dan to say more about how he thinks the new Atlantis is actually a, as it were, an actualization of what Bacon is outlining in the New Organon. But I think if you do read Serrana's interpretation of the New Atlantis as a text which is encouraging experimentation, I think there's a huge amount of text to support that reading.
I just wanted to add to this that we have a number of questions coming from the YouTube channel, which are all connected with allegorical interpretations. So now that we get into Dan's interpretation that this is about scientific allegory or allegory of science, then there are a number of questions about whether we can read the Feast of the Family as an allegory of alchemical processes, and are there connections there that might be drawn? And there are also some suggestions as to which part of the Feast of the Family correspond to what processes, but I'm not going to read them all. So scientific allegory, Dan.
Okay, first to address Dolores's question. The way in which it directly connects with the method of the Novum Organum is that Doina was going through about the different offices. We begin with the so-called merchants of light, who go out and gather information from foreign countries. For the merchants of light, the ones who collect experiments from books and from experimental arts and so on, are the stage of providing a natural history. Then the compilers draw the experiments from former four into rules and tables to give better light. And so on. And that looks like the stage of taking the natural histories and putting them into tables, as Bacon suggests that we have to do in book 2 of the Novum Organum. His outline of the method there, from which we can then draw axioms, as he calls them. The other steps are not explicitly in the Novum Organum, but it's a natural elaboration of the method that's in the Novum Organum, to add steps of going to more experiments, more compiling, until finally we get to the interpreters of nature who draw the final axioms out.
So then let me just spell this out a bit more generally. You are saying that Bacon doesn't provide an allegory of science. Bacon provides us with an allegory of his own method.
Right.
And his own method was developed a couple of years earlier than the New Atlantis, in a book written in Latin, which I started with saying that the New Atlantis is the book that everyone read. Well, Novum Organum is the book that no one read.
It's true.
So it's very interesting that the Novum Organum was in the 17th century, a book that people didn't care that much about and didn't go through many editions. And they loved the New Atlantis. They loved the Silva Silvarum, but they didn't like and didn't read the Novum Organum. So it might be that the connections you are making were kind of lost on, let's say, members of at least some of the members of the Royal Society. Why do you think Bacon would have provided his readers with an allegory of a method that they, was it a sort of pedagogical way of rewriting Novum Organum so that people care a bit more about his method?
Well, it's possible. I mean, the fact is that, these connections that I'm drawing are probably connections that many 17th century readers would not have seen, precisely because they didn't read the Novum Organum, and precisely because the Novum Organum was not as popular a work until you get probably to the 19th century, but that's not to say Bacon didn't hope that people would read the Novum Organum and see the connections there. I think, or perhaps one can say that the way of presenting the method in terms of these different functions within the House of Solomon is a way of popularizing his method of scientific inquiry, and making it accessible to an audience for whom the Latin Novum Organum was not accessible.
So would you say, Dan, that the Bacon is following the logic of the musos and logos of Plato, that the way that you really get people's attention is through the musoi, but if you're really serious, it's as you read the new organ and that's the logoi?
Well, that's not an implausible thing. I mean, remember Bacon's first very popular.
Great. I think it's a you know, obviously he's popularized for a larger audience what's undigestible for most of the population in England at the time.
But I mean, remember his first very popular work, of course, was The Wisdom of the Ancients. It was presenting
the essays as well. Yeah.
In terms of the interpretation of Greek myths. So, you know, as a pedagogical device. Well, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but still, I mean, that's I think a reasonable way of reading it. Now, would they have been able to see the Feast of the Family? Would the average reader have been able to see what was going on in the Feast of the Family? Maybe not. But I think if you read the Instauratio Magna and the Novum Organum, the connections are rather clear. Now, can there be an alchemical interpretation? That frankly hadn't occurred to me, but maybe it would be interesting to see somebody, you know, work out what an alchemical interpretation of the Feast of the Family would be. But I do think that it is a very important episode right in the middle of the work, and that one has got to ask the question, why did he put it there? And that there's got to be, you know, it isn't arbitrary. I think that there's got to be a reason why. And I've offered a reason, but if somebody else can find other reasons, Bacon is certainly open to complexity and ambiguity as well.
Doina, what do you think on this connection with alchemy?
Of course, Dana, I remember. So I don't. What I do remember is that I wrote my paper for Dana's class when I was a bachelor student about alchemy in the New Atlantis. I don't remember what I was claiming there, but I was definitely saying that there is a lot of alchemy, and the alchemical process can be indeed found there. And the entire symbolistic of the grapes and the gold and the hidden mother, which appears a lot in alchemy. So I don't know all the details about that, but I do have also a comment, if there's time now, about the connection with Silva and the Novum Organum, because I have a bit of a different reading of the New Atlantis, which is that indeed most of the things that are described about the Solomon's house are things that were already around, and this is not my reading, this is the reading in the literature on the New Atlantis. So most of the things already existed at James I court. And indeed, the Drebel's experiments and machines are mentioned and all these things. So my way of reading the New Atlantis, which also might be just a dream, so if you tell someone this is a dream, well, it is a dream, is do we really have to cross the pillars of Hercules and try to find the Atlantis? again, I was hoping we will talk a bit more about this. So we are going, if we do this, then we are going to do what the Spanish are doing, destroying cultures and just killing people, saying that this is in the name of faith, why they actually only want the gold of the Americas. So that's definitely not the model. In a way, we don't have to go anywhere because the richness that we need for our mind, it's already around. We just have to know what to do with it. So we just have to use all these discoveries and use my method that I'm going to describe. And that's enough for the new knowledge that I propose.
Well, that would be, yes, Sorana?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to
raise hand electronically.
I don't know how to raise my hand electronically. Doina, yes, but they are perfect the way they are, well, except that they're not. One of the important things that that Solomon's house does is send out merchants of light, right?
Well, that's another question. If Ben Salem is so amazing and has such a great science, why do they need to start from the books that are brought from other cultures? Because it's pretty unclear how many things they do on the island. It's pretty clear that they collect books and experiments, and then once these arrive on the island, they start selecting what's interesting. So that was...
You know why? Because they're doing Baconian science.
But
right.
Why aren't they doing this first step?
Sorry.
Well, that's partly why it is that their science is so great, is because they do go out and they look at what everybody else has done first. And to a certain extent, I mean, this is what it is that, I mean, that first step of going out and looking at what other people have done and looking in the books is to a certain extent what it is that Bacon has done in the Silva Silvarum. And he's also done new experiments, but there are also experiments that he has taken from books and other people. And that's what it is that he thinks you're supposed to do if you want to make the kind of progress that he's attributing to the House of Solomon.
But then,
yes.
sorry, but I do agree with that, because actually this reinforces the reading I proposed. So everything is already around. We just have to do the right thing. We don't have to go somewhere else. Look, even Solomon's house is actually starting from the books written by us.
Let me just give you a different perspective on this, a bit larger perspective again. If we think of other utopias, we've been discussing a bit about Morus and Campanella's utopias. And the first thing that struck you when you read the Utopia is that that's about an isolated island. Utopia is constructing the perfect society aside from the corruption of the world on an isolated island. And there are some connections between that island and the rest of the world because you have to know something about it. And therefore someone has gone there and come back and told the story and so on. What we have here in the New Atlantis though, although an island, it's not an isolated island. It's an island that is very well connected with the rest of the world through these merchants of light that are bringing onto the island all sorts of things. So if we read it as a project of a society, scientific, utopian, religious, whatever kind of society, this is the very opposite of the isolated utopia. It's more like, let's get all the knowledge we can get from the rest of the world and build our laboratory, which is at the center of the crossroads. It's a laboratory at the center of the crossroads of all meridians, all cultures, where all sorts of people are coming in. Don't forget that in the New Atlantis, we haven't touched on this, but there are all sorts of languages, all sorts of cultures. At some point, Audrey was mentioning the very important character of Job being the Jew. and so on. So it's a multicultural society, let's call it in modern terms. Many religions are there. Information is coming from all sorts of places, and it's very well connected with the rest of the world. It all almost puts you in mind of the cyberspace and the World Wide Web. And what do you think about this?
Well,
Dan?
here we are.
Here we are on the New Atlantis. And we are actually approaching the end. We have 10 more minutes. So Dan, now is the moment if you have anything to say. Jean-Paul Deluca. Can you turn on the mic?
Oh, hi, sorry. No, I just added a comment that in Utopias, like Campanella's, it is not as perhaps as, sorry, the screen is not very clear. No, but I was just saying that in Campanella's Civitas, for example, there is a constant exchange of people traveling, very much in the spirit of Bacon, actually, in the way, at least that is what the text suggests. So people are coming in, and the Solarians have specific officials who move out in order to learn from others and bring back that knowledge, which then they put apparently to better use. So I just wasn't sure about the isolation of Utopias, and perhaps even though the style and aim of the New Atlantis is rather different, but I think there would be interesting connections that could actually be explored on this point of communication and not isolation with other utopias. But I just wrote my comment. Thanks for bringing me in.
Thank you. Thank you. Maria, you need to turn on the mic.
Yes, yeah. Yes. I'm going back to Doña Cristina's mention of Spain. You mentioned Spain twice. First of all, in your biography of Bacon, supporting the war against Spain. And then afterwards, and talking about the alchemical and how, Spain was not about the spreading of religion, but of getting, the silver. And, that's one side of the story that I think that the Atlantis is very exciting as an open book, and a book that allows to see more connections rather than this kind of conventional or canonized stories of, England and Spain being irreconcilable, places. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the connections of Atlantis, of New Atlantis, with a very disparate moment or text, which is the Insula Barataria, Don Quixote and Sancho. This is all fiction. This is not science at all. And yet the Insula Barataria has been a puzzle for many readers, not only of Spanish culture of the time. My point being that the merchants of light spreading out from an island anchored in England, in the history of England, is puzzling to see how it could actually connect so well with that other orbit, with that other set of cultures, which is the Spanish-speaking world, or Spain's empire, whichever way it may be construed. And I think that it boils down to the compiling of knowledge that is both religious and scientific, irreconcilably. Again, Spain and England, science and religion. I think that New Atlantis really conjugates ways to do this. Just as a point of curiosity, I think of New Atlantis, and it mobilizes for me the building of El Escorial. El Escorial as a hermetic space, as a space that has towers of light, 2 crucial towers of light that now only the cloistered monks can see, but that were obviously designed for the king and for the people invited into it. The author of El Escorial, being Herrera, the founder of the Academy of Mathematics, which then goes on to become bureaucracy in the 17th century. So again, an institution that gets corrupted into bureaucracy when it should have been about the study of mathematics. So I see all these points of connection mobilized by New Atlantis that are wonderful. And I think that it's great that in a discussion like this, going into the text, we can see how to go out kind of intellectual alchemy. Thank you, Dana, for letting me speak.
Yeah, so I do agree that there is much more to say about Bacon and the Spanish world, and he definitely used at least Acosta and Monardes a lot. So he was really interested in what was coming from the New World. Maybe he was thinking that Spain doesn't do enough with knowledge that they were gathering.
Right. Not so much that it doesn't do enough, but that what is done has to be kept secret, because there's always, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. There are all these institutions that are hovering over the production of knowledge, both within and without Spain, and certainly in the New World. So I think that we're just kind of starting to pull the threads of that story now. Thank you. Thanks. Great to see you, Dan.
Right. Dan, do you have to say something on this, or do we have any other questions? We are kind of slow.
No, I don't have anything to add.
We are slowly.
It was a very interesting comment.
We have 5 more minutes to go. So conclusions, last words.
I want to know, does anyone have a good reason why the Magna Naturalia are at the end of the New Atlantis?
I was going to address that, but we sort of passed over for two other questions. I think we don't know why it's there because in part we don't know who put it there. We don't, for that matter, even really know that Bacon had intended for the New Atlantis to be published together with the Silva Savarum, or whether that was Raleigh who did that. And I think about the stuff at the very end. Who knows why it is? Who knows who put it there? It obviously connects with both the New Atlantis and the Silva Savarum, and you can trace through the different elements, and you can see their connection to the Magnalia. You can see connections with both sections in the Silva Savarum and with things that are attributed to the House of Solomon.
Is it credible to think that it's an expansion of the list at the end of the advancement of learning of the New World of the Sciences? So there's quite a bit of overlap between the desiderata in that list and the list that's at the end of the New Atlantis.
Yeah.
So I
very plausible, but it still doesn't say who put it there and why.
Right.
I think that's something that we just don't know. I think, Dorina, do you have an opinion about that?
No, I totally agree with what you said about we don't know why is there and who put them in that way.
In the manuscripts at the British Library, where does the MN, where does it appear as a single list? And is there anything about the manuscript which tells us about the chronology?
No, unfortunately there isn't. And there is nothing about the New Atlantis there. There's very little as we know about the composition of New Atlantis. We don't know when Bacon wrote it. We don't know whether Bacon read Campanella or not, for example. Now to go back to the Campanella, very interesting question and note that someone has given us. I'm afraid we have to wind up and finish. And let me just make a remark that if Bacon ever wanted to simplify his message by writing a New Atlantis, that was totally lost on us. And it might have been less on his contemporaries, although they had very different ideas about what the simplification has meant. But if the idea was to send us read his stuff, then I think it was a success, because all of us have read it many times, and some of us will go and read it again tonight. Let me thank you all for being with us. Dan, Doina, this was wonderful. Thank all of you for these wonderful questions, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dana.
Thank you, Dana. Bye-bye.